Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Brad Bollinger. I'm the publisher at the North Bay Business Journal, and welcome to our 4th annual North Coast Cannabis Industry Conference. This is our 4th, as I've mentioned, cannabis conference, but this is our 8th virtual conference. We decided way back in March that to fulfill our role as a media organization, to continue to keep people informed, bring them together, and platforms like this was something we needed to do. We realized we couldn't do it in person, so we went to the next best thing here on our Zoom platform. Well, once again, welcome. Thank you for being with us. This conference started out 4 years ago. We focused largely on the regulatory aspects of it as it was just getting started. And here we are 4 years down the road. And you'll find with this conference, we're focused on the business of cannabis and the market in cannabis. What works, what doesn't, what products are doing well. How do you get on the shelf and stay there? That's an all-important question. And we're going to start out with Tamar Maritz from BDS Analytics to give us an idea of the overall market. And then we're going to have a panel moderated by Jeffrey Hamilton from Farella Braun Martel, our underwriter, to talk about that topic of getting your product onto the shelf. So we're able to offer these conferences. We've offered all of them free to the public because of our underwriters. So please join me in thanking our founding underwriter for this conference, Farella Braun Martel. And if you know someone there, give them a wave, send them a thank you note, an email or something like that would be terrific. So before I introduce Tamar, I just want to mention that you can submit questions via the Q&A function on your screen there at the bottom of your screen. The chat function is disabled for this particular event, so please submit them via the Q&A, and then we will select questions for our presenters. So it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Tamar Maritz, who is the Vice President of Business Development at BDS Analytics. She has a background in market research and analytics. She's worked with many of the largest Fortune 500 companies. She has a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and an MBA with a focus on quantitative marketing strategy. So please welcome, we're so happy to have with us this morning, Tamar Maritz. Tamar, over to you.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you to the whole team for having me back. Last year was highly enjoyable, great event. So I'm actually going to turn my video off because my Wi-Fi sometimes can't handle deck and the video, my video off, sorry, Wi-Fi. So I'm going to leave the video off if that's okay. All right, well, again, thank you for having me back. And as a quick introduction, as Brad mentioned, my name is Tamar Maritz. I've been with BDSA, formerly BDS Analytics, for almost 4 years now. For those who might not be familiar, BDSA is a leading market research firm in the local and global cannabinoid space, working with manufacturers and brands, retailers, investors, and so forth, within and outside of the industry to help provide a holistic understanding of the evolving cannabinoid markets and consumers. While you might know us best for our retail sales tracking, or rather our category and brand and product level market sales research, of which we've had California data since 2017, which I launched myself, you may not be aware that we also research the consumer and their purchasing consumption behaviors and patterns, as well as forecast global and local markets through 2025, now also at the category level, thereby allowing me to provide you today with a comprehensive view of the California market, consumer, and where it's going. With that, while we'll only scratch the surface in terms of the depth and breadth of what we could get into, we've got a lot to cover, and I don't want to keep you folks here for hours, though I'm sure there's a couple folks on the call who'd probably enjoy that. So let's dive in. So in order to truly understand California's role and importance in the global cannabis market, let's first zoom out a little just to get a bit of perspective. 2019 saw $15 billion in legal cannabis sales globally, with the US and Canada making up about 95% of those sales. From our July forecast, you can see that BDSA expects the legal global market to hit almost $50 million in sales by 2025, with the US and Canada continuing to be major drivers of growth as US states come online and young markets continue to grow. As a little bit of a spoiler alert, BDSA actually just released our updated forecast, with the 2025 global market adjusted up to $57 billion. As we look into the major growth markets within the US through 2025, it's no surprise that California will continue to play a major role, expected to contribute to roughly 20% of US legal cannabis sales over the next 6 years. I'd like to also call out this all other bucket, predominantly made up of new medical and adult use markets coming online. Well, California is certainly the most important market, and sorry, I've spent most of my life here, so I'm obviously biased, but given the audience, feel comfortable letting that bias bleed through. But while California is clearly the most important market, these all other states are expected to contribute in terms of growth dollars over double what California is expected to do through 2025. So as these markets and internal models and forecasts evolve, BDSA is constantly keeping up with local and global regulations. This allows us to not just properly size the markets, but also to make predictions as far as when new medical and adult use markets will come online and the respective impact on the illicit or pre-existing markets. Now, I'm sure many have been thinking about COVID's impact on not just existing legal markets, but on legalization in some of these states coming online. As have we, of course, and BDSA has accounted for that in our future forecasts, which we are regularly updating. So now looking back a little bit at COVID's impact on legal cannabis markets. Overall, when looking at the first half of this year, monthly sales were up versus last year across most markets, including during the peak COVID and shelter-in-place days of March, April, and May. I don't need to state the obvious of cannabis's designation as essential as being critical to this growth. As you can see that Nevada, with its dependency on tourism and mandated delivery for the adult use channel, took the biggest hit. While BDSA also tracks Massachusetts and Illinois, they are very new markets, so no year-over-year insights there yet. However, we don't need a visual to tell us what took place in Massachusetts, given adult use sales were suspended altogether for almost 2 months, only opening back up in late May. But looking across states that fared much better, and just note, Maryland growth is a result mainly of new licensed retailers coming online. Many states adopted or adapted regulations around delivery and curbside pickup to meet COVID compliance requirements, allowing them to continue to fulfill consumer demand. In fact, when looking at California dispensaries that offered all three, so in-store, curbside pickup, and delivery, we can see the delivery and curbside pickup exploded with shelter in place. These two fulfillment methods made up about 40% of sales during peak COVID. Note that this is among dispensaries that offered all three fulfillment types. It does not include standalone delivery services, so delivery actually had a much bigger impact within the greater total market. I'd like to also call out that while you can see in-store share pickup as shelter in place began to lift, delivery still maintains a greater share than it did pre-COVID. Important to think about what this means for the new norm or the new consumer behavior and what dispensaries and brands can and need to do to adapt to this new trend. So although California has only been legal in adult use sales for a few years now, it's had an operational infrastructure for far longer. And as we saw in the slide before last, market maturity and its subsequent ability to adapt to new regulations was a major factor in each market's ability to weather the COVID storm. So zooming into daily California dollar sales, we can see surges on the days of announcement as consumers stock up on not just toilet paper, but cannabis as well, followed by a dip as A, consumers had just stocked up, right? And B, financial uncertainty kicked in and people were anxiously awaiting the arrival of their government stimulus checks. However, unfortunately for this industry, the stimulus checks arrived just in time, and you can see the ramp up in sales as we near 420. Even so, this year's 420 saw less in dollar sales than previous 420s, at least since 2017. This was partially due to the hashtag Flatten the 420 Curve initiative operators were implementing to both curb delivery and in-store, at least where available demand, on 420 by encouraging consumers to purchase their holiday cannabis in the days leading up to 420 instead of on 420 itself. Ultimately, 420 ended up, or 420 of 2020, ended up eclipsed by March 16th, the day California stocked up on cannabis as shelter in place was announced. When looking at number of transactions and average transaction value, we can see that after the surge days taper off, we see fewer shoppers but larger basket sizes per trip across all markets, indicating that consumers were still stocking up during the dip. Not surprising, as we saw these stock ups not just within dispensaries and cannabis, but across all retail channels. In addition to stocking up due to the imminent uncertainty, consumers were all of a sudden stuck at home and stressed as hell. So not only were they stocking up, they were moving through the stock up faster. They were indeed consuming more, a net positive for the industry. So in fact, in our consumer research, when asked about their shopping and consumption behaviors during the peak shelter-in-place times, the majority of consumers reported that their purchasing and consumption during COVID either increased or didn't change at all. Our consumer research also allows us to understand the reasons for purchasing and consumption and need states consumers are trying to solve. Being home and consuming more is almost expected. And under normal circumstances, consumers' primary reasons for consumption are sleep, anxiety, and relaxation anyway. So it's not surprising that they would turn to cannabis even more during these stressful times. Given these need states consumers are looking to solve, when we look at category growth during peak stock up in March, we see flower and edibles driving a significant amount of the growth. Edibles are not surprising to see, as we've seen that consumers, in addition to new consumers, who are in general more likely to enter via edibles due to the familiarity and comfort with the formats, are turning to cannabis during these times for health and wellness benefits, which inhalables are generally not conducive for, or known to be conducive for. Flower growth is interesting. While we'll dive into a few more category trends shortly, a few thoughts for now. While no major trends were seen in pack weight purchased, we obviously saw an increase in flower sales, driven by both an increase in units sold and an increase in average price at retail. However, the primary reason for the increase in average price for flower was likely less due to consumers trading up, and more so a result of market supply constraints due to the unexpected surges in consumer demand, especially in the flower category. And considering these supply constraints, while we can see that the majority of flower sales are eighths, this could be less indicative of consumer demand and more indicative of the limited availability of larger pack weights. Certainly worth thinking about if you're a flower producer or distributor. And when looking at edibles, however, we can see that under $20 edible product unit sales surged during peak shelter in place. In fact, this price band grew 23% in the first half of this year, compared to the over $20 price band, which saw a slight decrease in unit sales, indicating consumers are in fact trading down and buying more in reaction to the economic uncertainty. So we spent quite a bit of time focusing on COVID's impact on the California market, and I'm glad we did, because COVID has impacted the future of all industries, and cannabis is no exception. But now let's spend the rest of the time taking a look at California's evolving consumer and subsequent product and category evolution. So looking at the overall consumption and acceptance of cannabis in California, we can see that about 2/3 of adults in California either consume or are open to consuming cannabis. About half of that are consumers, so about 1/3 of California adults currently consume. When we started this research in the spring of 2017, only 23% of California adults consumed cannabis. I'll spare you the mental math exercise. That's almost 50% growth of California consumers since 2017 alone. But I'd like to call out the other more interesting segment, the acceptors. These are individuals who don't yet consume but are open to it. This is literally low-hanging fruit or untapped target market. These acceptors are open to trying cannabis, either for fun, wellness, or both, and are just looking for someone to tell them what to buy and where to buy it. And in thinking about this untapped target market and its potential, if you look at more mature adult use markets, such as Colorado or Oregon, roughly 40% of adults currently consume cannabis in those states, indicating that California certainly has a way to go in capturing that acceptor base and even rejectors and converting them into consumers. While this acceptor segment is fascinating to me, and I could spend an hour talking about it, again, if anyone does want to spend that time, feel free to reach out to me afterwards, and I'm more than happy to have a chat. But while this acceptor segment is fascinating to me, I'm sure you're all dying to learn a little bit more about this existing consumer, right? And what drives their cannabis purchasing and consumption. Having resided myself in both NorCal and SoCal, and full disclosure, I'm currently living down in Long Beach, so currently a SoCal resident. It's no surprise that the rivalry holds strong even when it comes to consumption of cannabis, with SoCal taking a slight lead. And taking a look at the average California consumer, we can see some basic demographics and not necessarily surprising demographics. But frankly, demographics are, at least in my opinion, the least interesting element of what our consumer research dives into. Since there's no one California cannabis consumer, if we think about the consumer not just by their basic demographics, but by their purchase and consumption drivers, why they consume and buy what they buy, and where they buy it, what need states they're looking to solve, etc., we can begin to cement them by the type of consumer they are and the respective role cannabis plays or doesn't play in their lives. And so this is definitely a shameless plug. BDSA has actually just launched its very first consumer segmentation study. This is a true statistical segmentation where we've input lifestyle attitudes and attitudes towards cannabis into a statistical analysis, grouping like people based on shared attitudes. First, we've identified 4 non-consumer segments: complete rejectors, cautious medical supporters, willing but not able, and legally limited. The bottom 2, and perhaps even some of the cautious medical supporters, make up the acceptor base, or untapped target market, as we previously discussed. As for consumers, we've identified the following 6 segments: cannabis advocates, better living loyalists, socializers, recreationalists, medically motivated, and medical misgivings. And while this study dives deep into the profiles, attitudes, and behaviors of each of these segments, as it is barely hot off the press, I can't give away too much, but I will call out one example, the better living loyalists. This consumer is a young liberal male who lives in the city. He's an advocate and believes in the health and wellness benefits of cannabis for themselves and others, but also consumes for fun. This segment represents about 9% of consumers. So as these consumer and non-consumer segments are mutually exclusive, we can track the evolution of these segments as we continue to study the consumer on a semi-annual basis. As you think about identifying, sizing, and targeting consumer segments, knowing how big they currently are is important, but knowing how fast they are each growing and the respective evolving preferences, behaviors, and expectations will allow you to make better decisions around your product branding, branding and marketing communication strategy. We've just seen that the better living loyalist consumes for both health and wellness as well as for fun. Zooming out to look at the overall California consumer, we can see that 71% report that they consume for recreational and social reasons, and 48% report that they consume for health or medical. As evidenced by these numbers, and as seen with the better living loyalist, Californian consumers as a whole consume for both fun as well as for health or medical reasons, with 37% of California consumers reporting that they consume for both. And we're looking again at SoCal versus NorCal. We can see that while the same share of both report that they consume for health or medical reasons, only 68% of NorCal consumers report that they consume for fun, compared to 74% of SoCal consumers. Clearly, SoCal consumers are more likely to consume for fun, or at the very least admit it. Another point for SoCal, or should I say 6 points? Get it? Ha. Looking again at the overall California consumer, and as we think about how they are evolving, it's important to remember that what they are buying today is partially reflective of their demand, but also of the current supply, as in what brands and products are currently available on shelves. So while it's certainly important to pay attention to what products sell, as well as the reported usage, it's just as important to understand consumer preference for these products and the need states they're looking to solve in order to make sure you invest your R&D dollars, both on the product and branding side, to properly meet the evolving consumer preference and demand. For example, when looking at California consumer preference by product category, while preferences for inhalables has decreased by about 25% since we began to research the California consumer back in 2017, as recent as Q1 of this year, over half of California consumers still prefer inhalables. As a side note, about half of these consumers prefer their inhalables in loose leaf, flower, or bud form versus vapes or dabbables. By comparison, 33% of California consumers prefer edibles, which we earlier saw benefited as a category during COVID as consumers turned to cannabis for health and wellness benefits. As previously discussed, consumers consume for both health and wellness as well as fun. Thus, it's not surprising to see that cross-consumption is common as consumers seek a multitude of benefits. Looking at inhalable consumers, the largest preferred category, we can see that most inhalable consumers also consume edibles, and that their top form of edible consumptions are gummies, baked goods, and chocolate. So we've deduced that the reason consumers are cross-consuming is that they are looking for different benefits. In fact, when you look at the top 3 primary reasons for consumption among California consumers, we can see that pain is the top reported benefit among topical consumers, sleep is the top reported benefit among edible consumers, and of course, relaxation and being mellow is the top reported benefit among inhalable consumers. And finally, given the fact that SoCal is more likely to consume for fun, it's not surprising to see a higher rate of inhalation, another point for Southern California. So looking back at how these various consumer preferences and need states have driven sales, we can see that while inhalables, which are made up of flower, vapes, and pre-rolls, certainly makes up the majority of sales, the edibles category has been consistently gaining share since 2017. As consumption increased and normalized in California, we saw that vapes, which allowed for, as consumption is increasing and normalizing in California, we saw that vapes, which allowed for discrete and convenient consumption, took share for flower, which had previously dominated the market. Interestingly, however, we have been seeing flower making a comeback lately. Vapegate and coronavirus and the associated lung diseases with each could certainly be factors there, but also some of the primary advantages of vaping, such as discretion, are, at least for now, irrelevant as everyone's at home and freely consuming their flower. And one important thing I'd like to call out, while vape has lost share in recent months, vape sales are not down, but having only gained $1 million in additional dollar sales from Q1 to Q2, they certainly aren't driving the growth in the market. Flower and edibles are driving that growth. As I mentioned before, we've just published the new forecasts, and with that are now forecasting at the category level. So now we can see not only what categories drove historical growth, but what categories are expected to drive future growth. On the previous slide, we saw that the flower category had just recently regained its rightful place in the cannabis kingdom. And now, drum roll please, we can also see that the flower category is expected to be the largest, is expected to be the biggest contributor to total legal cannabis sales in California through 2025, holding about a third market share in 2025 and maintaining its title as the #1 category. And note that while I've purposely not included California's 2025 market size on this slide, I will tell you that we're expecting it to at the very least double from 2019. As we focused quite a bit on flower and edibles, I'd like to pull up a few highlights across these two categories. California flower was roughly a $1 billion market in 2019, with Wedding Cake representing the top selling strain and Flocana the #1 brand. Other top flower brands in California in 2019 were Candescent, Connected, Henry's, and King's Garden, in alphabetical order. Ingestibles, which include sublinguals, saw $500 million in sales in 2019. Gummies make up a significant portion of this product category, and Kiva held the #1 spot as top dollar seller. In addition to, followed by Care by Design, which is one of CannaCraft's brands. So you'll be hearing from Bill shortly, and Bill, wink. If you could see me, I'm winking. Cushy Punch, Plus Products, and Thunderstorm. So as the markets are maturing and growing, consumers evolving, and new brands and products constantly hitting shelves, we will be seeing even more competition for these top dollar sales spots, with the top 5 edible brands in California currently representing over half the edible market. Fortunately, with new consumers coming in and additional markets coming online, lots of initiatives underway in various California cities right now, the total size of the prize is growing, and as we saw, is expected to keep growing. And so on that positive note, I believe we're at about 20 minutes, maybe a little over even. So if we want to dive into questions, now would be a good time. I will be sending out this deck afterwards. So I don't feel the need to run through the summary right now unless there's a significant amount of hand raising for that. But yeah, unless there's any other questions or unless there's a need for this, let's go into questions.
Well, thank you very much, Tamar. That was just packed with information, but my takeaway is it seems they're having more fun in Southern California than we are up here. So
I moved here. No.
There you go. There you go. Probably because you moved there. That's right. Okay, so the first question, will these presentations be available? Yes, but they'll be on our website, and this event will be posted to our website as well, so you can watch it in multiple ways. So I do have a question here. Person asks, curious about the rejectors. Is there a unifying reason for rejecting it, such as political, economic status, age?
So there isn't necessarily a unifying, right? I mean, just like there's varied types of acceptors and consumers, there are also various types of rejectors. We define rejectors as someone that isn't necessarily against consuming, but isn't open to consuming themselves. And so for a lot of them, there are obviously the expected hurdles of it, still being illicit, not still subscribing to the stigma, political or religious beliefs, so forth. But even when you look among that rejector segment, there's varied beliefs and attitudes towards cannabis. There's folks that, and I think about 70% of rejectors still agree that cannabis should be legal, at least medically. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Another question, is there any information on hemp versus cannabis?
Certainly. I mean, so in partnership with IRI, we actually track the hemp derived market, right? So any CBD product sales that sell outside of the dispensary channel. And we also capture a lot of that research in our consumer research and in our forecasting research. Off the top of my head and available in the slide, I don't have any numbers, but feel free to reach out to me afterwards and I'll see, at the very least what I can share.
Great, great. And that may be a story for the Business Journal as well, some down the road. one more question. This will have to be our last one. In terms of marketing, what trends are showing the largest impact? I was thinking kind of the same thing. How do you reach these under 35 consumers? Where do you go to find them?
You're asking the $1 million question, right? I mean, this is, I think, the $1 billion question. I think that, one of the big challenges this industry has right now is, two of the big challenges right now, and they're related, is its challenges around branding. So not just awareness, but also not just loyalty, but also awareness, right? And that obviously is tied to the marketing challenges this industry faces, as it's essentially handcuffed from many traditional marketing avenues, or from accessing many traditional marketing avenues. And so, lots of heavily relies on guerrilla marketing, heavily relies on social media. But the real question, right? I mean, I think targeting the existing consumer is easier. I think the biggest question for me, like I said, I'm obsessed with that acceptor group, and my mom sits in that group as well as others, right? And she's always looking to, she wants cannabis to solve her need states. She believes in it, but she has no idea what to buy or where to buy it, right? Nobody is reaching out to my mom and saying, hi, Tamar's mom, you have this need, this product solves this need, I make this product, oh, you can go to this dispensary and buy this product and it'll be there every single time and deliver the same effect every single time. That's how you generate brand loyalty. And for a variety of reasons, this industry is challenged in doing that, right? Whether it's advertising or whether it's supply challenges or regulatory challenges and so forth. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
it does. It's kind of like you said. It has to be like your grocery store. The thing that you want is going to be there in the same quality and the same quantity each time. So that's where we're headed, I guess, is to be able to do that. So I want to thank you, Tamar, for being with us. Again, second year in a row, and for saying yes when I called you so long ago. And we want to wish you the best and stay safe and healthy. And thank you for being with us this morning.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thanks, Ben.
So now we'll turn to our panel, and to moderate the panel is Jeffrey Hamilton, who is a senior associate with Farella Braun Martel. He counsels companies of all kinds, all sizes, from startups to publicly traded corporations. He has a background I could go on for a while here, but I'll just say that his distinctions include being on the Chambers and Partners USA Cannabis Law list of top lawyers in the Western United States this year. And he is a member of the executive committee of the Cannabis Law section of the Bar Association of San Francisco. And then our panelists, and they'll introduce themselves in more detail. There are three of them: Cy Scott, who is currently the co-founder and CEO of Headset, another analytics company; Alana Joyce, who's the senior compliance counsel at Ease; and Bill Silver, who's the president of new markets for CannaCraft. So please welcome all of them. And Jeffrey, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. So first off, Tamar, that was amazing. It's awkward to give applause over Zoom, but that was wonderful. As Phil mentioned, my name is Jeff Hamilton. I'm a senior associate at Farella Braun Martel. I do cannabis transactions. So the goal of this panel, other than to give everyone a distraction from obsessively reading the news and refreshing their air quality map, is to discuss how to get your products in front of consumers. As everyone knows, the number of cannabis products, even cannabis product categories, changes on an almost daily basis. And so for a dispensary to decide how to allocate its limited shelf space is a really overwhelming task with almost no margin for error. Who knows what products are going to sell, whether you'll lose loyal customers if you fail to stock a product or if you discontinue a product, and generally, how do you get the right mix to keep all your customers happy? So we're lucky enough here to have a pretty incredible panel. I'm really excited. Dr. Bill Silver, president of CannaCraft; Cy Scott, CEO of Headset; and Alana Joyce of Ease. Bill, let's start with you. Could you just give us a quick introduction to CannaCraft and your role there, how you got there?
Sure. Morning, Jeff. Morning, everyone on the conference. CannaCraft's been around since 2014. We're California's largest manufacturer of branded products. And if you'll hold on 1 second, I'm getting a horrible echo through these headphones. So I'm going to try and change that up. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Apologies for that. Trying to work through all the Zoom things, and I thought I was so smart having 2 Zooms because I keep losing it, and yet create another problem. So moving forward, most people who are consumers may not have heard of CannaCraft, but know us by our brands. We're kind of like the PG&E of the, or it's not PG&E, sorry, P&G, 2 very different companies of cannabis in California. So Absolute Extracts and Care by Design were our original brands. One's a lifestyle brand, one's a medical brand. We started producing edibles. We introduced Satori chocolate. We were first with beverages in a sort of social format in a partnership with Lagunitas, and that's the Hi-Fi Hops product. And most recently, we've launched a flower brand called Farmer and the Felon, which has a social justice sort of persona to it. And we're real excited about that brand, in part because proceeds from that brand support Last Prisoner Project, and really are part of our attempt to bring others along who helped us get to where we are.
Great. Sai, could you tell us a little bit about Headset?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for everyone attending. So Headset's a data and analytics company for the cannabis industry. We operate both in the US and in Canada, covering a number of legal markets, primarily adult use, but we also have a footprint in medical as well. We work with cannabis operators, such as retailers and product manufacturers, as well as organizations that are interested in the cannabis space, whether that's financial services companies, consumer packaged goods companies, and so on, to really bring them the data that can help drive some informed decisions around their business. Really, our mission at Headset is to provide people with the information so that they can be more successful, and ultimately that this nascent and emerging industry can be more successful. Our data comes from our retail cooperators. It's all point of sale derived, which gives us great insight into things like sales, inventory, price points, margins, and even demographic and purchase behavior that we see from loyalty programs. We deliver all of this in real time. The industry moves pretty quickly, changes pretty frequently for a variety of reasons, and you need to make decisions on timely data, and we strive to do that. We work with retailers in over 25 different markets, and excited to be here today to kind of talk about California in particular and some of the trends we're seeing here.
Thanks. Alana, do you want to do a quick introduction to Ease?
Yeah, I would love to. So I'm Alana Joyce. Thank you guys all for coming today. I am Senior Compliance Counsel at Ease. Over the summer, we just had our 6-year birthday. So Ease has been around since the medical market, as well as the launch of the legal market. And if you're unfamiliar with the company, we're a technology and marketing platform that helps connect age-verified users and cannabis patients to legal cannabis product. We happen to be the largest online marketplace in the state of California. It's the only state we currently operate in. And we only permit licensed retailers and brands to utilize our technology. We basically have, I think people are probably most familiar with our website, which is the B2C tool where we help reach consumers. But Ease also offers a number of B2B tools that actually help retailers facilitate on-demand delivery. And we recently, at the start of this year, kind of launched an Ease 2.0, where we have a separate organization that is focused on verticalization. So we're actually owning and operating the supply chain, starting with retailers in the state of California.
Thanks. So before we dive in, one thing I love about this panel in particular is that we always think about CannaCraft and Ease as being these giant, powerful companies, but if you look at the Ease menu, there's really only a few CannaCraft products, and it's, at least where I live, notably absent of the top 5 best-selling vape cartridges in the state, according to Headset. So the relationship between our panelists is full of wins and losses, just like any other, which I think is really relevant to this conversation. So just in terms of housekeeping, I'm going to direct the questions to individual panelists just because it's easier over Zoom. But this is meant to be a conversation, so anyone jump in at any point if you've got something to say. So just to dive in, I want to start off by talking about what is shelf space in a dispensary. So I was hoping you could walk us through how shelf space in a dispensary typically is divvied out. So what are the largest product categories in a dispensary? What are the smallest ones? And also what tends to fly off of the shelves and what products tend to collect dust? Can you just give us a general overview of the landscape?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, at Headset, our goal is really to help these retailers and dispensaries not have any products that end up collecting quite a bit of dust. But yeah, shelf space is an interesting concept, and Alana will have a lot of insight into online where, you know, shelf space is infinite. But when we're talking about brick and mortar, certainly there is limited real estate. You know, kind of in general, you see, you know, a long tail of 50 to 100 brands at any given dispensary across a variety of categories. That said, you know, it's generally the top 10 brands that are accounting for over 50% of a store's sale. And when we talk about brands at Headset, to Bill's point, we're really talking about the brands underneath CannaCraft. So, you know, ABX and so on. So when you consolidate those all into like a parent company, that number gets even smaller. So you're seeing a lot of concentration there. But assuming that like every SKU or individual product needs some footprint at the retailer, you know, for visibility for the consumer, there certainly are some categories that have probably overrepresented shelf space given kind of the sales velocity, particularly slower moving categories, things like topicals, tinctures. You see a lot of SKUs there for a category that's relatively small. That said, you know, it's a small amount of brands as well. Other areas like flower, while there are a lot of brands in the flower space, they're a little less represented as far as like the percentage of share of sales that they have at any given store. When we think about inventory, you know, we really see stuff over-indexed in categories like merchandise and paraphernalia. So a lot of money is tied up in that type of categories of non-cannabis based products. And you really, you know, want to be mindful of things like inventory turn as a retailer, so you can free up some of that capital, use on marketing, you know, driving more customers in your door. You don't want it tied up in inventory. Now that said, other like cannabis categories, categories like flower, are kind of on the other side of that. We see some high turnover. You know, a rule of thumb for retailers is, you know, you want a turnover of like 2 to 4, which means, you know, your inventory is turning over a couple times, maybe 4 times a month. Any more than that, and it gets pretty aggressive and gets challenging for an inventory manager to make sure that you don't run into stockouts, which is a pretty significant, you know, problem in the space. So it really varies category to category. I would say some of the smaller categories like the topicals and the capsules do have more SKU representation than their share of sales at the retailer. So, you know, as a retailer, you know, be mindful of that. As a brand, certainly be mindful of that when you go and talk to these retailers and dispensaries.
Great. And Alana, can you talk about how shelf space works for an online menu versus a brick and mortar where there's actually shelf spaces? Can you take more risks because you're storing products in warehouses, or do you have to be more conservative just because of the logistics of managing deliveries?
I would say there's a little bit of both. So, I mean, a lot of how we determine shelf space, I mean, it deals with the retailer and the stock that they hold, but I think at Ease, it's kind of twofold. The first was kind of creating this menu that was consistent throughout the state, because at the beginning of the legal market, it was really hard to kind of get, you know, if you're in San Francisco and you find that you really like Plus gummies, and then you're down in LA the next week and you can't find that same product, creating a consistent menu was really important for us. So one of the things that we look for in brands and creating the menu is a consistent supply chain, which has its challenges sometimes. But I do think you can probably take a little bit more risk Granted, kind of similar to what Sai said is, we're not looking to keep product just like stored and aging on warehouse shelves at all. It's definitely the prerogative of the retailer to move through things. I do think you can have a little bit more flexibility to be creative on an online menu, because like Ease itself as a technology platform is a marketing tool for your brand. So if you're trying to break into a new category or launch a new product, you can utilize features on an online menu that you might not necessarily be able to utilize, or you could have similar utilization at a retail sale. So for example, if you wanted to have a banner or you wanted an email campaign to go out, that might be equated to having some sort of like point of sale material at a retail operation you can actually walk into. So I think you have a little bit more opportunity to be creative. The way that our menu works too is, we do a ton of data analytics works, and I think Tamar really had it right to like know your consumer. And most of the consumers on the Ease menu are looking for cheap flower. In addition, we follow other types of trends as well. So being able to stock the menu with things that our consumer wants to see is one of our priorities as well. But yeah, we organize the menu from lowest price to highest price, and then we break down things into categories throughout. As some brands want to venture into new categories, we'll consider opening things up. I know we're considering a new category right now for some edible products that kind of fit another category. So I think you have a little bit more opportunity to be creative, but we definitely, we have a whole data analytics team that makes sure that, the ordering that is being done by the retailers, that, they're not ordering excess product just because they have warehouse space to store that product, but they're ordering the product because they anticipate this will be the consumer demand for it. So we very much are following all those trends and metrics when we do this. But, there have been brands that have been launched on the Ease menu, and that's the only place that they've been launched, and they haven't been on retail shelves. And because they utilize like certain features like email campaigns or banners or stuff like that within the platform, because there are so many marketing restrictions outwardly that are off the platform, I think it's a good opportunity to get your brand name kind of out there to consumers that already exist.
Great. So this is probably the question most people are interested in, why they signed up for this. Bill, I want to start with you. Where do you see as the most and least saturated product categories? So where do you think there's an opportunity to enter the market with a new product?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, because part of it is what, as a new entrant, are you actually capable of producing? It's very complicated to manufacture products in the space. But with that as a caveat, we're particularly excited about the beverage category into the future. So it's a very small part of the edibles category, which, as Tamara illustrated, it is still, a growing but relatively small part of the industry as a whole. But we see some of our fastest growth in that beverage category. And of course, it's a form factor that people are very familiar with in social settings. Therein lies the rub. 2020 was supposed to be the year of social consumption in California, with the growth and expansion of consumption lounges, and with the opportunity to use event licenses to sell cannabis. And of course, COVID changed all of that. And so it was a pivot for how we could market, sell, and frankly use this product category. The other one I would mention, where I think there's a real opportunity for people, are those products that are at the forward edge of science in cannabis, particularly some of the new cannabinoids. So people barely understand CBD, THC, and frankly, hemp versus cannabis, and all the things that, if you're familiar with the industry a little bit, you may have a handle on. But there's literally dozens of other cannabinoids, let alone the other plant elements, the terpenes, flavonoids, terpenoids that are in there. And I think into the future, some of the sort of newer cannabinoids, as we learn how to better extract and formulate them, represent a real opportunity for new product development.
Great. Sai, I'll ask you the same question. What do you see as the opportunity?
Sure. Yeah. To echo, Bill's comment, it's a hard question to answer for a variety of reasons, and certainly, from a quantitative perspective, I think we can look at it, but of course, you need to know like what can you bring to market effectively. Where's your area of expertise? But one thing that we encourage people to look at is overall category share. Category growth rates. So again, like beverage, relatively small category share, but has some good growth rates, some good growth percentages that we see. A lot of that has to do with, when you're a small percentage and you grow, you see, large percentage growth, all relative. Other things are, looking at, demographics and the cannabis consumer and who's becoming the cannabis consumer and who's coming into the space here and how that impacts category growth. So kind of planning for that. And then, so once you have a sense of, what does the category landscape look like, from overall share of sales and growth, then you really need to look at the number of brands and products that are in each one of those categories. And, what does the brand concentration look like for that? And when we look at August data in California, there's over 1,300 brands selling across, a variety of categories, whether it's flower, beverage, capsules, concentrates, and so on. Smaller categories like beverages, capsules, have a smaller number of brands. So in the beverage category, we saw 37 brands in the market. When we look at brand concentration, about almost 15% of sales is going to the number one brand in beverage, and then about 30% is going to brands 2 and 3. So you can see it's getting very concentrated in that top 3 brands there. So if you think about from a perspective of, well, there's only 37 brands that I have to compete with, maybe I have a great chance here. When you look and you say, well, almost 50% of sales are going to 3 brands already, you're starting to see some of that brand concentration, and hopefully that translates into consumer brand loyalty. So they're starting to see these brands consistently, purchase these brands consistently. So it may be harder for you to jump into something like that. When we look at other categories like flower, it's a bit more distributed, a bit more long tail. You see a large percentage of sales going to brands that are 50 plus in their ranking. Flower had almost 400 brands in the market. So that's a situation where flower accounts for 40% of dollar sales, about 30% of units, but you've got hundreds of brands. So you're jumping into a pool of a lot of brands that are out there, and it's going to be harder potentially to get noticed. But when we look at the top 4 brands for flower, it's really about 10% of sales going to the top 4 brands. So that's very different than beverages. So there is an opportunity to become that number one brand in flower, but it's gonna take a lot to get there. I think if I was to pick a category that's pretty interesting in the California market, it would be vapor pen. Vapor pens have been pretty flat when we look at year-over-year growth. So, and had some challenges with some of the Vaporgate issues and all that. And I think we're coming out of that certainly. But the reason I say that is when we look at brand concentration for vapor pens, it's pretty low. It's, it's I guess still high, all things considered, but about 30% to the top 4 brands. So there's an opportunity to become a top brand there. But from a demographic perspective, Generation Z, which is the newest, cannabis consumer generation, which really is only, people that are aged 21 to 23. So, not that many consumers. They are really over-indexed on vapor pens. So they're purchasing about 35% of their purchases are going to vapor pens, and that segment of consumers is just naturally going to grow, right? Because every year someone becomes 21. And so if that trend continues, we should expect to see, vapor pens coming up. So it's like a big generalized non-answer. I think it really varies. I think it really a lot of ways to look at it, but certainly starting with categories, starting with category growth, and then looking at brand concentration and kind of determining how can you fit within that landscape.
So to follow up on that, Alana, do you as like a qualitative question, do you see any product categories where you're like, I wish that there were more options here? Yeah.
I definitely do. I think when we started with the adult use legal market, if you recall a year or two ago, you would see mostly very high THC products, which kind of fit the consumer of the moment, which was like the pothead stereotype that we have. And I think over the past years, Ease does this really cool state of the cannabis report every year where we aggregate our data to see what is going on with the consumer. So our most recent report was all the analytics from 2019. And the biggest growth of consumer that we saw were boomers over 50 years old. And we also saw women diversify the market much, much more. So we had a very male heavy, high THC consumer. And now we're kind of like branching out into this consumer that is a little bit more diversified. And I think we're going to continue to see that with kind of the like curious, I hate that term, but like people who are open to trying it, as Tamar said, but haven't quite gotten into it yet. And I think we've seen this trend of lower THC products, like people still like high THC flower products, but we're seeing low dose edibles like win out to higher dose edibles in the categories, because I think people, they want help with anxiety and sleep, and they're stressed out about COVID and work. And so we see a lower dose edible being a thing, but I think it can actually get even lower than it is. And I think what's completely missing from the market right now is like people like edibles. We've seen an uptick in COVID, probably because, COVID's respiratory issues we see, so less people are smoking flower. But, thinking about a product that you can consume the whole thing rather than just one serving size at a time. So like, could you eat a whole pack of gummies and that only account for 2 milligrams? I think Bill was really smart in saying that know your like expertise and your skill in what you can manufacture. I think it's hard to control lower doses and in like the form factor. So, right now I see a lot of people in the beverage category trying to create these beverages that are 10 milligrams a piece because that is the serving size that we can get up to. But, why not have a beverage that's just 1 or 2 milligrams that a consumer that doesn't really need that full high experience and just wants to replace their evening glass of wine with a cannabis beverage, they can drink the whole thing without worrying that they're going to be high as a kite that night. So, I think there's a form factor where like you can have a bag of crackers or a tin of gummies or a full beverage where you can actually go about your day and enjoy this kind of like little body high or head high, but doing it as a whole product rather than just one serving of a product. And I don't think we've quite seen that yet in the market.
Jeff, I jump in on that. Alana raises a really good point about that. And there's a huge production challenge. So within California, you're restricted to within 10% of the sort of cannabinoid content. That is, if you're producing a 1 milligram product, that's what it says on the package, then you got sort of 0.9 to 1.1. So your margin for error is really small at those low those low concentrations, and it gets really hard to consistently produce a product. So that's one of the challenges, and it's a really good point that she raised. So we'd like to have more in that category. In other states, it's even worse because of how they do the testing. So even if you're 2 milligram or 3 milligram product like a microdose gummy, in California, it's an average within the bag or within the tin. In Washington State, for example, they actually measure the individual one. And so now you need a sort of a print form factor as opposed to something that would be more natural. So if you have a fruit-based product and you have a piece of fruit in their different sizes, it's going to affect your concentration. So I guess I'm just saying it's tough out there.
Yeah, you're totally right, and it's like you almost need like it's crazy that you need a legal exception to make a product that is so low dose, but you almost need like the BCC to say, you know, if your total serving size is under 2 milligrams or 3 milligrams, you don't need to put the per serving size or per piece size on it. But yeah, there are definitely regulatory challenges in addition to just like how your machinery works and how you test for the product.
And edibles is certainly a category that's a bit under indexed on the brand representation. So as far as category share of units, it's about 23% of unit sales go to edible products, and that's covered by 114 brands. So on a percentage basis, you got 23% of the units going to 8% of the California cannabis brand landscape. So there is room there. The edible, like as far as brand concentration, it's pretty concentrated in those top brands that are out there. And there's brands that you guys see all the time in California on the store shelves. But I think product innovation can disrupt that, right? If you can bring something unique and new and different that the consumer wants, you can, you know, have a good shot at kind of getting into that top tier.
So let's talk briefly about price point. We saw in Tamar's presentation that sales have increased for lower price point items. Let's say I have my vision for a product. Do you guys think, and Bill, I'll start with you, do you think I spend the extra money to make a premium product, or do you think I focus on the lowering the MSRP, just given the current state of the market?
Well, it's a great question for people up here in wine country to consider, because so much of our attention in this part of the world in that industry is on these premium wine brands, and yet most of the sales happens at a much lower price point. And it's sort of the same thing in cannabis. So as the producer, especially if you're in an area where you're producing high quality flower, for instance, and you want to bring that to market, that's wonderful, but it is really a smaller size part of the market. So you might get better margins, but you're reducing your consumer set. Now add in COVID, economic recession, and uncertainty. So we're looking at the lower price points as the opportunity for the foreseeable future. And cannabis happens faster, so foreseeable future 6, 12, 18 months. But I think it would be difficult to enter the market with a premium product right now, unless you had a good way of ensuring your potential customers are aware of it. And that's also tough to do.
Sayalana, you agree?
Yeah, I certainly agree. Looking at like actual sales in flower, the flower category in the last 90 days, the number 2 best-selling brand in the category has what we call an equivalized price. So we use this equivalized price metric, which is a per gram price for things like flower, per milligram price for things like edible products, but it's about 50% less than the number 3 brand in the market. And this brand is specifically positioned themselves as a discount brand, like the best deal in town type of brand. And you see them gaining, quite a bit of market share. So I think the consumer is very sensitive to price right now for all those reasons that Bill pointed out. On the flip side of that, flower pricing in general, when we look at just equivalized prices from January of this year to today, average price actually gone up about $1 pre-tax, from about $8.40 to $9.40. So cannabis is getting more expensive, and there could be a variety of reasons that drive that. Supply constraints, obviously, the pandemic we're in. There's also a host of dynamics, but the consumer is still looking for good prices. So we look at equivalized prices specifically to try and take out some of the, are people just buying larger package sizes? Are they, buying more 8s versus single grams and so on? So it's a pretty good metric. And that's just looking at flower. When we look at things like, vapor pens, the price has actually gone down, about a 10% discount there. Other categories, edibles, beverages, relatively flat. But I think all in all, certainly price sensitivity. I think if we're in a situation where there is a long-term recession in the past, when you look at parallels like alcohol, it was a low-priced alcoholic beverages that did really well compared to the premium brands. Not that cannabis is a one-to-one there, but there are certainly similarities. So I expect to see some of those same trends.
Mm-hmm. Alana. Yeah.
Here I come. Yeah, I actually completely agree. I see, I think we have a very conscious consumer right now, and I think that's only kind of heightened because of COVID and just like the state of the world. But I see so many brands come to us and they're like, yeah, we're going to launch this premium or like luxury product and it's going to be great. And I personally just think that's a terrible idea. You don't see those products move off the shelf. And I'm curious if it's because like we just don't associate premium with cannabis right now. Like a high is kind of a high and what you're looking for, and you're looking for a great product, but people don't really like associate like luxury products. And you also, the way that a luxury product in any other industry, whether it's the wine industry or fashion or something like that, we don't have the luxury of those same types of marketing channels and experiences that we could offer a luxury consumer. So like, why would I spend this extra money? Maybe if it's like a pretty box, but why is that pretty box for these pre-rolls $25 more than like the okay looking box for pre-rolls of similar value? So I just don't think you can offer like the same types of luxury experiences and marketing tools that you would be able to do in any other industry. So there's really no sense of this like heightened expense in the cannabis industry. And I do think if you like look at the cannabis consumer, like they're looking for a product that either gets them high or a product that works for the specific thing that they're trying to treat. If they're anxious or stressed, having trouble sleeping, it's less about like this focus on luxury. I'm curious if we'll see any kind of like the way that we have AVAs in wine, like when we finally get to establish the fact that we might have like all of this flowers from Humboldt, and we can establish kind of like quality associations between the consumer and where certain products come from, we might see that increase in the future. But I think for now, like the idea of launching a premium cannabis brand, I think for the brands that think they have premium cannabis brands, they're fooling themselves. And I think the consumer's just not looking for that.
Great. So just to piggyback on what you just said, I kind of want to talk briefly about marketing and the packaging that your product comes in. So just on generally speaking, on a no-names basis, Alana, are there any products that you've seen where you just thought like, oh, this branding is terrible, this is like off? And as a follow-up, do you have expectations or your dispensary partners for how products should be packaged? So like premium flower comes in fancy glass jars, for example.
I would say there's no expectation of what the package should come in from me when brands come across my desk, but for the fact that I expect them to be packaged and labeled in a compliant manner. So everything that comes and is ordered through one of our retail partners goes through a compliance check. So, I'm just looking for all of the things that you need to have on your product. I want it to be CRP, tamper evident, and then everything goes to delivery in exit bags. So on the form factor, if you put your premium flower in a bag, I don't care. Rather than a glass jar, your margins are probably going to be higher. The other part of your question was about
just if you've seen products that you just thought the branding was off.
Yes.
What are people not to do?
I cringe every time I see a product that is like riddled with like fruit shapes on the front or is like very childish driven. It's like, it drives me bonkers because like the number one rule in cannabis is like stay away from marketing to minors, stay away from like anything that's cartoony. So anytime somebody sends me something that's like got fruit snacks all over it or just like is super colorful and like looks like something a child would want to pick up, I'm like, do you remember that 21 plus rule we have in this industry? It drives me bonkers. And then I'll have people send me things that are like, well, what do you think between this fruit snack and this fruit snack? And I was like, they're still fruit snacks. So that makes me cringe. I think, people should pay attention to their branding and the way that things look. Consumers definitely respond to it. People like pretty packages, but just stay away from cartoons and lots of colors and kind of like childish looking things.
Which is it's so true, and it's crazy because the gummy segment within edibles does so well, and gummy branding and packaging historically has kind of been more of that cartoonish look, in the candy aisle and so on. So it's like chocolate as a segment, you can have high-end chocolates, and people are very used to marketing very quality high-end chocolates, but quality high-end gummy marketing is a pretty, I feel like, a new learned behavior for brands. And so you see some people slide kind of into some of what you're seeing there. It's certainly a challenge, but it'd be interesting to see how we crack it here in cannabis.
Yeah, I think people should focus on their branding and their brand story and what they're looking to tell the consumer about the product, which is kind of funny because in any other industry, you kind of see that consumer focus. And then sometimes you just see people being like, I want to launch this beverage because I think it's cool. And you're like, did you think about who you're trying to sell this to?
And Bill, any rules of thumb when it comes to branding marketing? What to watch out for, what you tell your audience not to do?
Yeah, I mean, brands are different than products and different than packaging. Brands, the experience that the customer has with whatever you're providing for them. Every single one of our brands has rebranded since its inception. And that speaks to the changing consumer and changing consumer experience with the brand. So I think Alana's point is well taken. Start with what's compliant as just a baseline. Unfortunately, it's not always easy to know that, and those rules change. But there are some simple rules. Don't make it appeal to kids, and start from there. But then what experience are you trying to create for your consumer becomes critical in that, and that's been some of the changes. For us, like the Care by Design brand has always had a medical and science focus to it, and you'll see a rebranding of that relatively soon here, and it's because the science has changed. We're sort of having the next iteration of formulations and ability to have an impact on what people are seeking. We just launched a flower brand, and branded flower is kind of an interesting space because many people purchase flower for the strain and the effects that are associated with the strain. And so the brand has, traditionally kind of been irrelevant except for some strong, if you will, kind of OG brands in the industry. We launched this brand, Farmer and the Felon, because it's an experience-based brand. One, it tells the story of CannaCraft's founders, one who's both were farmers and one who became a felon because of his time in the industry. But we launched in part to raise awareness to the people that are still incarcerated for things that are legal today in most areas, and through an association with the Last Prisoner Project, which is focused on getting every single person out of jail who's still incarcerated for a minor cannabis crime. We're creating this sort of, if you will, social justice participatory experience for the dispensaries and for the consumers as well. And so, yes, the strains are there, and the information about the flower is part of that. But there's another story that we're telling, and there's an activity that people can participate. And I think that type of branding is relatively nascent in the cannabis industry. It's more, if you will, driven by, I think as Alana was saying, you have an idea and I think this is going to be great. It's not focused from the consumer first.
And brand is, I mean, it's obvious to say, but so critical, right, to these product manufacturers in the context of brand affinity, brand loyalty, and then the pricing power. I think Alana mentioned, like, for lack of marketing and branding, when a consumer is presented with a number of different brands and they don't know the differences, or none of them speak to them, or none of them have some of that narrative that Bill's mentioning, they're going to look at THC content, they're going to look at price point, maybe they'll look at other testing data and then make that decision. And so building these brands is absolutely critical. It's just difficult to do with some of the marketing constraints that we have today.
So while we're on the topic of just building brands and getting buy-in, and while you're talking, so like every bodega and drugstore has Coke or Pepsi, Doritos, Orbit bubblegum. Are we seeing the same thing in cannabis? And if not, do you think we're far off from it?
I think we're starting to see it, definitely, but I think it's within certain categories. So categories like edibles, beverages, the types of products that are a bit more challenging to produce than maybe just flower-based products like flour or pre-rolls and so on. So you're seeing some of that there. When I was looking at the top 10 brands in California last 90 days, and then 6 of those 10 weren't in the top 10 a year ago, and it moved up pretty significantly. So that said, stuff is still changing, and it's not totally a Coke and Pepsi type situation where it's just really hard to beat the incumbents, but you are starting to see some common names on store shelves, which is good, and that's kind of what brands want to be, and that's what consumers want to see as well. If you went to the grocery store every time and you saw new sodas, you'd have a hard time making that decision, right? So we are seeing that, but it does kind of depend on category. Certain categories, as I mentioned, like flour, given to Bill's point, a lot of it is strain based, and sometimes they'll be looking for a particularly popular new strain. It's relatively easy for a company to either get those genetics or all of a sudden have those genetics in some capacity, and so you see some of that driving brand positioning. But I think, all in all, we're getting there. And I think over time, as the market continues to mature, you're going to see more and more of that kind of Coke, Pepsi type dynamic.
Mm-hmm. And Alana, do you see that as well, just in your experience? So do you see stocking certain specific products as being crucial to your customer base, or are really high quality products fungible? Are all of your suppliers on the hot seat, or does some have some sort of consistent representation on your menu?
I definitely think it's important to have consistency on the menu because, we have a whole customer service team that, if consumers are looking for a certain product, and I think, we're all creatures of habit, and, you find something you really like, you want to be able to buy that again and again. So, looking for partners that have consistent supply chains is something I mentioned earlier that we're consistently doing, trying to forecast for issues in the future as well. But for us, I mentioned earlier, one of our biggest consumers is looking for cheap flower products. So I think in that category, sometimes the brand matters a little bit less because they're more looking for the price point. But yeah, I definitely think we're moving into a world where people recognize, they recognize whether it's Island or Pax Pods or the Dosises of the world. They're starting to get that brand recognition. I think because you can have the same experience but throughout the state of California. But I think there's a huge amount of room for setting like who's going to be the Apple of the cannabis world to kind of stick out. I think Sai mentioned that like the people who are at the top of the categories this year weren't last year. And I just think consumers are still making up their minds about products. And there's a lot of untapped consumer as well. We had over 74% of all deliveries on the platform last year were by first-time consumers. So when you're having that many new people purchase products, they haven't made their mind up yet about what their favorite products are. So I think there's still plenty of room for consumer loyalty. I think getting your brand name out there is tough considering the marketing restrictions that we have. But I still think there's plenty of room for kind of like the all-star brands to take their position in the market.
And so, Bill, CannaCraft has some of the all-star brands in the market. So I wanted to ask, how much negotiating leverage do you have for your more successful product categories? And what does it mean to be in the driver's seat in terms of negotiating with a dispensary, or is everything always on a purchase order basis?
So I might characterize the relationship a little bit differently between us and the dispensary partners, and especially using the services of Headset or BDSA. We try to work with them and understand who their customer is, and then because of our portfolio of brands, we like to think we always have a solution or a portfolio of solutions for them. But I think this is, what's really happening, at least for us, is less about do we have more or less power than we used to have, or do we have power because our brands are recognized. And we're actually, with our retail partners, trying to do the same thing. We're trying to serve our customers with what they want. Where we saw some opportunity recently was with both VapeGate and COVID, where people were all of a sudden uncertain about the reliability, the safety, frankly, of their cannabis product. And that's where the work we had done over years in establishing brand loyalty really made a difference, because the bud tenders, who still serve as a gatekeeper in many ways, were willing to recommend our brands, because across time we've proven that we're able to meet sort of the testing and safety standards. And so while it's true what Sai said, that there's been movement in and out of the top 10 year on year, look across 5 years, and there's really only a handful of companies that have been around at scale with brands across that time frame. And I think being one of those, it does give us an opportunity to work differently with our retail partners. But it's not, it's really not negotiating from a power base, but really trying to do a better job of serving the customer, make it easier for them. I mean, in 2018, the average buyer may have been seeing 20 to even 50 companies a week trying to keep product on their shelves. And if they could reduce those number of meetings and work with someone that can provide a variety of products and brands that they know customers are going to come in and ask for, it makes it easier.
So I know we only have a couple minutes before we turn to questions, but I wanted to ask one last question of Sai and Alana, which is, have you seen demographics typically driving how products sell at dispensaries? So Sai, could you look at a product and have a sense of where that product is going to sell the best? And can you give me a couple examples if the answer is yes?
Yeah, I guess the answer is on a retail-to-retail basis, and kind of depends on the audience of the retailer and how they're positioning themselves, like the kind of consumer that they want to bring in. The different demographics definitely have different purchase patterns. Where you look at like an older demographic, like baby boomers, purchasing categories like topicals, capsules, edibles, maybe a bit more than some of the younger generation. I know I mentioned Generation Z, really a lot of affinity vapor pens, a lot of affinity to concentrates, so like extract type products, higher potency products, and less expensive products as well. As you can imagine, someone who's 21 probably doesn't have as much purchasing power as someone who's maybe 55 or 60. So we see smaller baskets, smaller transaction sizes for that audience. So I guess from a product perspective, if you're introducing a low-priced vapor pen, like that might resonate with like a Generation Z type audience. If you're developing a higher priced topical for wellness, maybe for a baby boomer audience. So from a demographic perspective, that's kind of how, if I was to look at a product, how I'd want to position it. And then I guess just finding the retailers that target that audience. I've heard of retailers in California that will help elderly by providing a shuttle service to bring them to the stores. And if you see stores that do that type of behavior, then maybe your products, if you are in the capsules and topicals and more wellness type products, might sell better at a location that does that versus someone who's maybe marketing to a younger audience. However, they may do that. That might sell more the lower priced products, fast moving products like pre-rolls or things like vapor pens to the Generation Z individuals. So I would look at the category, the demographic category that you're really targeting. Goes back to branding. How does this brand speak to someone who's a Generation Z member? Does this brand talk to me? Not that I'm a Generation Z member, but if I was, you ask that question, and then if that's true, is it the right price point? Is it in the right category? And is it sold at the right retailers that also is targeting, from a branding perspective, that demographic?
Great. So Brad, I think we're at questions. Do you want to jump in? And obviously, thank you to everyone. This was wonderful. Thanks to everyone for your time.
What an incredible discussion. I don't think we could have had this discussion 2-3 years ago. Thank you to all of you for your input. I took 3 things away, and then we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Alana, the low dose, product, I think, I keep saying that the cannabis needs a French paradox moment to kind of push it forward. And maybe that's it. And then I thought the brand Bill, the farmer and a felon, it's about a story. The brand is about a story. And then Cy, 6 out of 10 products that were on top a year ago are no longer on top. So you just saw Exxon exit the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So things can happen fast. So thanks to all of you. So a question, Jeffrey, do you mind if I just go ahead and ask this one question that came up on the Q&A?
Not at all. Go ahead.
So what is the market for luxury on premise? Is there any potential there? Who wants to take that? Maybe, of course.
Yeah. Let me jump in, because we were bullish on premise, just on premise as an opportunity. And of course, there's not on premise these days.
Right.
But I'm an optimist. I envision a future, not where we get back to where we were, because I don't think that's ever going to happen. But that's different. And I do think social consumption is an important driver forward for this industry. And that social consumption is going to necessitate different form factors. The bag of edibles that you can have socially, savory products versus sweet products, and certainly beverages would be part of that. So I do think there'll be an opportunity to introduce luxury brands in that channel. And I think you'll start to see, as manufacturing gets better, that luxury brand isn't only the story, but there's a product quality that rises to that level. And I think there's few producers that, in terms of manufactured products in the space, that actually can produce something that would even qualify as luxury right now. Again, it's just really hard to do.
You think with the on-premise, there's room to position an on-premise business as like a more luxury minded? Like if I think about a nice cocktail lounge where every cocktail is at least $15 versus like a dive bar, or like a high-end restaurant, right? Where you're buying really nice bottles of wine versus maybe just a less fine establishment. I mean, maybe that could drive some of that behavior for premium brands on the on-premises, just kind of how that mixes up. And I think it's pretty early yet. So I think there's only a handful of consumption lounges, and obviously everything's been disrupted. But I think that could definitely be a channel to get some of these more premium brands that visibility, where they're not just on a store shelf competing with everybody else on price point, that they're more curated experience at like a higher end on-premise location.
Alana, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would say, I could see more of a market for luxury goods in a world where we aren't limited to consumption lounges. I think like Cy and Bill have it right. If it was a bougier consumption lounge, there's one in LA. I consider myself, a purchaser of luxury goods, and I've never been to an on-premises consumption lounge. So if I was going to purchase product, I think at like a premium rate, there would have to be some sort of like experience with it. And we just, with the legal system that we have in the state of California, we don't really have room for that yet, just because we don't have exceptions to the rules.
Jeffrey, last question to you.
Last question to me.
Well, would you like to ask the last question?
So I guess I'm a corporate lawyer, so I always end every interview with the same question, which is there anything that you think that the audience would want to hear that we haven't said in this discussion so far? Cy, let's start with you because you're on my left.
Well, there's always so much to talk about. I'm looking at the questions here from the audience. I think, in terms of marketing, what trends are showing the largest impact? I think that's an age-old question. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer there. I think the answer is you've got to be really creative. One area that seems to work is the in-store demo days, where you'll set up as a brand at a location and try and educate consumers coming in, and hopefully educating the staff of the retail location as well, because really these bud tenders, the sales staff at these dispensaries and retailers are very much driving brand sales, because consumers don't necessarily know, and they ask. And I do the same thing, and I've been involved in the cannabis space for 10 years, and given it changes so quickly, every time I go in, I ask, what would you recommend? And so, making sure you have that presence in store as much as possible, or at the very least, the right stores that sell a significant amount of your product, or maybe don't and should have that right demographic mix. And then time of day matters too, depending on the type of product. If you're selling things like capsules and topicals, earlier in the afternoon is better. If you're selling things like pre-rolls, Friday evening is better. So just really measuring that is one marketing channel. It's not particularly scalable. It's pretty hard to do. It's very costly. But we are pretty hamstrung with marketing and advertising. You can't use traditional like digital media like Facebook and Google and so on effectively. So yeah, I'd say just get creative, but there's lots of interesting ways to market.
Anyone else? Well, we're a tiny bit over time, so I want to thank our panel. Jeff, thanks for all the work you put into preparing the questions. Alana, thank you for being with us. Cy and Bill, and I want to thank Tamar, who kind of set the tone. There's a lot of growth potential out there. And then I want to thank Farella Braun Martel as our founding underwriter here today. And thank you again for all your time. And our thoughts are with anyone out there that's been impacted by these fires, our friends and neighbors. We seem to have to keep pulling together as a community almost weekly. So once again, thank you for being with us, and thank you to Farella Braun for underwriting this so we could offer it free to attendees. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.